Welcome to Exploring Early Music. I'm Max Ramage, and today we're talking about Gregorian Chant, also known as plainchant. This repertoire is fundamental to Western music, and our earliest examples of what we would consider music notation come from Gregorian chant. So, what is plainchant? Put simply, it's the set of sung melodies that were devised during the Middle Ages for use in Christian worship. Now, these melodies would be sung by monks in monasteries or by choirs in churches and cathedrals. Now, Gregorian chant gets its name from the legend that Pope Gregory the Great, who reigned from 590 to 604, composed these melodies. In fact, by the turn of the 1000s, the story was that the Holy Spirit had assumed the form of a dove and dictated the chant melodies to Gregory. However, there's no hard evidence that Pope Gregory actually wrote the music named after him, and indeed, the origins of Gregorian chant are shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that the Carolingian dynasty of the Franks, whose most famous member was Charlemagne, played a pivotal role in establishing Gregorian chant as the dominant repertoire in Western Christendom. Pippin the Short and his son Charlemagne were concerned with unifying the lands they had conquered under one standard religion. The Frankish rulers therefore suppressed the local methods of worship in their kingdom, called the Gallican Rite, and replaced those local traditions with an official liturgy imported from Rome. This also entailed importing melodies. Scholars debate to what extent this Roman practice merged and blended with the local Gallican practice, but the upshot is the repertoire that Charlemagne installed in the Frankish lands contained the seeds of what we know as Gregorian chant. When modern musicians see a piece of Gregorian chant for the first time, they are always struck by the notation. There aren't any rhythmic values. We just have a series of note heads with no stems. So how are we supposed to perform this music without any rhythmic indications? Actually, the question of rhythm in Gregorian chant has been debated for centuries. Some scholars have proposed that chant may have been performed with rhythms derived from classical Latin and Greek systems of poetic meter. Others think that the proper way to perform chant is to give each note roughly the same duration, with slight rhythmic variations within that basic framework. In the early 20th century, André Moquereau of Solesmes Abbey in France put forth a complex system of rhythmic interpretation of plainchant. But the discussion is far from settled, so whenever we perform chant, we have to make rhythmic choices ourselves. Here's the first part of a Kyrie chant on violin. Now, when the Carolingians had imported all those chants from Rome, they felt the need to classify them in order to make liturgical performance more systematic and comprehensible. The classification system that they adopted was what we call the modes. In medieval chant, there are 8 different modes, or categories of melody. The medieval music theorist known as Pseudo-Odo defined mode very succinctly in the Enchiridion Musicae, or Musical Handbook of 935. He said, "A mode is a rule which classes every melody according to its final note. This means if you have a given chant melody, you look at the last note, and that determines what mode the chant belongs to. In medieval chant, there were 4 notes a melody could end on: D, E, F, or G. But hang on, I said earlier that there were 8 modes. How can this be if there are only 4 possible final notes? Well, the truth is that Pseudo-Odo's definition of mode, a mode is a rule which classes every melody according to its final, is correct, but it leaves out some details and nuances of the medieval concept of mode. To begin with, the range of a melody, its lowest and highest notes, play a role in determining the mode. If the chant's range falls between the final and the note an octave above the final, give or take a note on either side, then the mode is called authentic. On the other hand, if the final is in the middle of the chant's range, with several notes extending on either side of the final, then the mode of the chant is called plagal. Each of the 4 possible final notes, D, E, F, and G, is associated with an authentic mode and a plagal mode. That's how we get 8 modes in total. The medieval music theorists named their modes according to labels they borrowed from the Roman philosopher Boethius, who had in turn gotten them from the ancient Greeks. The authentic modes that ended on D, E, F, and G were called Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and Mixolydian, respectively, and the corresponding plagal modes were called Hypodorian, Hypophrygian, Hypolydian, and Hypomixolydian. The Greek prefix hypo means below, and the ranges of the plagal modes are indeed below the ranges of the corresponding authentic modes, as mentioned earlier. The mode names ultimately refer to places in the ancient world. For example, Phrygia was a region in Asia Minor. But these geographical connotations have nothing to do with the actual melodies to which medieval theorists assigned these labels. If we consider the chant melody I played earlier, it would be in the plagal Dorian mode, because it ends on D, and the final note is in the middle of the melody's range overall. If, on the other hand, the final note were at the bottom of the total range, then the mode would be authentic Dorian instead. The medieval writers' concept of mode didn't just have to do with finals and ranges. It also related to melodic patterns. Particularly in the early part of the Middle Ages, before the advent of precise pitch notation, each mode was conceptually associated with certain melodic patterns or clichés. Some of these patterns may have derived from the Byzantine modal system of the Eastern Roman Empire, but others were established later, as short fragments of melody set to Latin texts. Another concept that falls under the umbrella of mode in the Middle Ages is the pattern of whole steps and half steps of the melody's notes in relation to the final. Remember that Dorian is the name of a mode whose final is D, while the next pitch up from D, E, is a whole step away, and the next pitch up from E is F, which is a half step away from E, and the next pitch up from F, G, is a whole step away from F. The medieval music theorists were very interested in the way whole steps and half steps were arranged relative to the final. These arrangements of intervals were what gave each mode its distinctive character. So to sum up, the concept of mode in medieval music really embraces several underlying ideas. Edmund Hurd summarizes it this way: every mode was associated with characteristic melodic patterns, a specific final note, and a particular arrangement of whole steps and half steps between the final and the other notes used in the melody. Next time, we'll talk about the origins of instrumental music. Until then, happy listening.